Hi,
Hi.
here we're here with Reginé Gilbert, who's a UX designer, lecturer, consultant, assistant professor at NYU, and the author of Inclusive Design for a Digital World and Designing with Accessibility in Mind. Reginé is one of 15 amazing speakers coming to an event apart Fall Summit 2021, which is coming to a device near you October 11th to 13th. Reginé, welcome.
Thank you.
How you
Good to
doing?
be here. I'm good.
Good. It's humid today.
It's humid and New York City humidity is something else and I'm a sweater. So, it's a lot of this and a lot of fanning.
The fan makes noise, so we'll the hand fan, but it's very
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe we can show it to the
I
audience at the end.
should.
Yeah,
My beautiful fan that I got at the African Market on 116th Street. If you're ever in New York City, you need a nice fan. This is the best.
yeah, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start the process here. You've worked for companies from Disney to Ralph Lauren. What do you do for them?
So in my past life before being a professor, I was a UX designer. I was also a PM. I've had many different roles within companies. But my getting into design on the digital side, because I used to be a fashion designer, but that's aside. Getting into the digital side of things happened around 2014. So I am not as seasoned as a lot of people, and I got into accessibility shortly after I got into design.
What got you into accessibility?
The lack of, I felt that there wasn't, I remember taking my course on UX design, and there was one slide about accessibility. And then when I started teaching, I incorporated accessibility into my classrooms and also brought in people with disabilities, to show people with lived experiences and inform my students that you need to design beyond yourself.
That must have been very eye-opening for a lot of students.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back and ask students like, how did that have any impact? I don't know because students come and students go, but a few students did tell me that the class where I brought folks in was really they just it was just something that they had never thought of, and that's what I consistently kept hearing was that, oh, I never thought about this, I never thought about this, and that's across the board, and it's still happening in design, which is why I do my best to incorporate accessibility into my courses from the very beginning.
It's still happening. It's still happening 25 years after the beginnings of web design. It's still
Yeah,
it's
still
weird because originally web design was very accessible. It was just HTML and there was almost no way to mess it up.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's wild that things are kind of going in reverse, um, and yeah, I don't even know what to say about
I
that.
mean, it is a constant fight. When you teach your students about the designing and coding aspects of things, do you teach them to start with accessibility first, like start with an accessible rather than start with a complicated framework and then
Yes.
retrofit?
Yeah, so I don't teach code. I teach UX design, and this
Right.
semester I'm teaching a voice user interface design. And what I like to do, because I say I can't teach anybody anything. Um,
Huh.
I can only ask questions that I hope will promote thought that will then teach them. And in essence, they're teaching themselves, right? So I ask a lot of questions. So for example, my voice class, we were talking about conversation yesterday. And I said, there's a thought and there's some speech and there's, seeing and hearing but I said, what if you can't see? And what if you can't hear? What does that mean for a conversation?
Right.
And then, I ask the students like, who in here wears glasses? Do you need these glasses? And how's life if you break your glasses? Right? And so then they start thinking, oh, yeah, because so many of them do wear glasses or wear contacts. Or I say, what if you're in a loud bar and you're trying to talk to somebody, but they can't hear, what does that mean for conversation? And so that's what I do is I ask a lot of questions.
I've known hearing impaired people who if one-on-one in a quiet setting, you'd never know they were hearing impaired. They're partially reading lips and partially, and they're fine. But if you go to like a loud restaurant, uh, they suddenly feel lost because the cues that they normally use to emulate what people with better hearing, or that's probably the wrong word, but people who aren't hearing impaired do
Right.
by hearing, they have to do by other means, and those other means become difficult, like a big echoing, a big crowded popular restaurant. Suddenly I've seen people, really wonderful people who are very funny and articulate and great conversationalists, just sort of sit there and withdraw into themselves, and it's terrible, and you feel so bad. And of course we make stuff like this, we
Yeah.
make stuff that makes people feel bad. um,
And yesterday, so I'm teaching and I teach with the mask on and all my students are masked. And I said, this for a conversation is totally different from the way that we've experienced conversation our whole lives.
I,
Now we really have to listen because we cannot read someone's lips, right? We can't see what they're saying. We can't even see, there's a lot of things that we do with our
but a
mouths and
sheet
we can't
to,
see
yeah,
you can't see everything. So there that this has forever changed. The pandemic has forever changed us in so many ways.
maybe some ways for the better at way too high a cost, but maybe some ways for the better in terms of social things and accessibility, just inclusiveness awareness.
Yeah.
Um, your book is called Inclusive Design for a Digital World. Who's it for? What's it about?
So the book I wrote for beginners who are interested in learning about primarily web accessibility, but in the book I speak a little bit about extended realities, all augmented reality, virtual reality, but the book is mainly focused on the web. And I I I based the book off a talk that I did designing with accessibility in mind. And I took a lot of the questions that I got over the years from students and put them into the book. And then also just talking to people and talking to my friends. So the technical reviewer of the book is my friend Sarah Allen, and Sarah Allen is deaf. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't like, oh, I'm this person. I have disabilities, but they're not visible, right? So I'm not this person who's outwardly saying all these things, but I wanted to make sure that I got input from the disability community because nothing about us without us, right? So that was a big thing. So that's who the book is for, and a little bit about what it's about.
Cool. And even that sensitivity is really important, because even if you have massive disabilities, you still can't speak for every person with disabilities, and every
No.
person is different. I remember once I was using an ATM and it ate my card, and I couldn't get it back, and the bank phone wasn't answering. And the person behind me in line starts to put their card in, and I said, "Don't, it's broken." And they put it in anyway. They got their money. They pulled the card out and said, "Worked for me." I'm always thought, and I remember that for the rest of my life, because, and I'm guilty of that sometimes, like, well, it's okay for me, so it's okay for everybody. And that's what we want to avoid. Or just the fact that I have whatever disability doesn't mean that I understand, or I have whatever difference doesn't mean that I understand someone else's difference. Even having the same difference with someone can be a profoundly different experience.
Yeah,
Two people
totally.
have trauma, one becomes a fighter and the other is broken.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing about, I think the biggest thing in I get to, I co-teach a lovely class called Looking Forward with Gus Chalkias, and Gus is blind, and he says accessibility is options, right? And that's not something that we provide enough of so that we can make things inclusive. I think that we can do a lot more in providing options. We just don't think about it, right? That's something we were talking about before we started recording is that what I found is when people when I introduce accessibility because people haven't heard of it or don't know about it, they're like, "Oh, I never thought about that before." And I've heard that so much to the point of it makes me say, everybody talks about empathy, and I was like, "Oh, empathy is a skill that you need to practice. You don't just have it and then It's there. It's like if you want to get in shape and you work out once a year, it's not going to happen.
Right. And also empathy within your own group, within your own bubble is great. It's really important. It's like caring about the members of your family. That's much better than being psychotic and not caring about them, but it's not enough. And
Right.
you've got to care about wider community because we're all connected, I think.
We are all connected. That is the truth.
And that's kind of the area of design that you work in and the area of design that you teach in. And it's very close to my heart. You and your students at New York University are working on a project now for NASA. What
Yeah.
what is it like,
So
and
we're
how did that come about and all that?
Yeah, so I'll tell the story. I mean, I was volunteering at an event. It was an event for blind folks to learn soldering for physical computing. So it was a blind soldering event, and I was a volunteer, and another volunteer there. We started talking, and I mentioned that every semester my students work with a real life client. My students have worked with the New York Public Library. They worked with Microsoft, and this person, Trey, said, "Would your students like to work with NASA?" And on the inside, I was like, "What? That would be amazing for my students to, work with NASA." So he said, his business partner and him started RISA Labs, which focuses on science, and they were going for a NASA grant, and my students and I were part of that grant. And so the project is called Eclipse Soundscapes, and it's a citizen science project. Anybody could be a citizen science, and basically, people will be given a recorder to record sounds during the 2023 and 2024 eclipse, and then these sounds will be uploaded to a website. So my students this past semester and over the summer have been researching what does it mean to create an accessible experience where there will be sound involved, and that sound will have data attached to it, and that data can be compared. So those are just some of the things that I'll be talking about in the talk. This is a 5-year long project, so and we're just in the first 6 months of it. So we have a lot more to do, but I will get to share what we've done so far and what we plan to do next.
This is for your talk, Accessible Data and Sound, that you're giving next month at an event Park, Fall
Yeah.
Summer. And the you said sound, recording sound. Do eclipses make sound?
So the main focus of the project is making Eclipse accessible for people in the blind and low vision community. So if you're not able to see an eclipse, you can hear an eclipse through sound. There's sounds in nature that happen. There's,
Yeah.
for example, the biggest example is crickets. So during, an eclipse happens during the day. And when an eclipse happens, it becomes dark. A lot of people have said that there's lots of senses actually that, we may not pay attention to if we're just looking at the eclipse, but it gets cold. People have told me, oh yeah, I remember getting cold during an eclipse. And before an eclipse, you won't hear much of anything. Let's say you're out in nature. And then during the eclipse, you'll hear crickets. And then when the eclipse finishes, you won't hear them anymore because the animals and the insects think that it's night during that time. So all kinds of things happen within nature, even within cities and things like that. So that's the main purpose of this particular grant is to make the eclipse accessible to the blind and low vision community, people who are not able to see the eclipse, but they can hear the eclipse.
Hear an eclipse.
Hmm.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You're going to take us at a point. You're going to take us through like the problem solving, the thinking.
Yep. So I'm going to walk through. First of all, I'm going to explain an eclipse because I don't know if everybody knows. I'm just going to do a little bit of science and talk about it. And Trey, who is part of Arista Labs, is an astrophysicist. And when I was taking him through the slides, he's like, "I want you to explain this stuff." And he's like, "I don't want to get too deep." And I was like, "Well, I have an hour to talk, so I can get a little deep, but I won't go super astrophysicist deep. I'm not
Right.
an astrophysicist." But yes, we talk about the initial problem and also talk about how this particular project was built in a way where it is not designing for it, it's designing with the entire way through.
Okay, and explain, I think I know what you mean, but maybe not everybody does. So what do you mean by designing with, not designing for?
So a lot of times, when working on a design project, people say we need to make add accessibility in and add accessibility in. But there's not designing with the actual communities, the disability communities. So this project is working with the National Federation for the Blind. They're also working with I get the acronym. It's NCAM, but it's they make accessible media.
And
So it's working with people who do accessible media and also working with the blind and low vision community to make sure that what we're creating is accessible by, we're discussing what works well, what doesn't work well, what do people need, and even to the point of, the recorders that are being used. There's a lot of assumptions, right? That are being made, but then those assumptions get busted when folks who are blind and low vision actually handle the recorder. So there's a lot of little things that I'll touch on throughout the talk.
this sounds great. I wish we had more time now. I really want to thank you for your time today, Reginé, and I can't wait to see your session next month. And folks watching, you can see Reginé's session, Accessible Data and Sound, on October 12th at an event apart Fall Summit 2021. And as a special offer, if you purchase a Fall Summit 2021 3-day pass during this month of September, you'll receive a free copy of Eva Penzimug's new book, Designed for Safety. Check the conference schedule and sign up. Visit aneventapart.com. That's it for this edition. Thanks very much. Thanks again, Reginé.
Thank you.